What's up, people? Thank you for joining me here on YouTube for exclusive content of Morton's Law Podcasts. Also, please check out Morton's Law Podcast on all major platforms. I'm going to talk about Blood and Guts. I know it's been a few days since the event happened, but I wanted to give my take on it. First, before I get into that, I just wanted to talk about this Dark Side of the Ring, this past episode involving Brian Pillman, Part 2. I mean, that was emotional, to say the least. It was really difficult to watch that last 10 minutes with Brian Pillman Jr. talking about the history with his stepfather and then his mother, and now how they've repaired the relationship and how he just tries to get by every day and learn the mistakes that his father made. And when you hear stuff like that, it just makes you want to root for a guy. And now going forward, I'm going to want the best for him. I mean, he's now one of my favorite wrestlers just because when you hear that story, you can't help but want to see that guy do his best. And, you know, it's been really difficult to watch some of these dark sides of the ring. I mean, we have the Ultimate Warrior coming up, the Dynamite Kid. Some of them are very emotional and just tough. And same thing with the A&E biographies, which, by the way, if you notice, some of the biographies in the Dark Side of the Ring, they're kind of overlapping. You're getting a little bit from both. And like I know the Warrior's going to come up on the biography, I believe, just like he's on the Dark Side of the Ring. I believe that's the case. But like we got to see the Randy Savage on both. So yeah, let's get into Blood and Guts. I mean, long anticipated event. Although people could say this was a rushed event. I mean, you talk about two teams, two factions going through a feud, and you can say the feud just started. I mean, what have we really accomplished with this feud that would warrant such a blow-off match like War Games, Blood and Guts, whatever you want to call it? And, you know, I did my best to try to avoid the internet wrestling community and what everyone thought, just because you hear so many different opinions. I mean, at least I heard that people were split on the event itself, and I'm just hoping I can provide a different take, something you haven't heard. Please comment on the bottom if you like what I have to say, and also subscribe if you can. So, like I said, the match was rushed, and people argue that, okay, this is on free TV on top of it. Could you have waited? Could this feud, I mean, some feuds last 6 months to a year. I mean, people talk about Double or Nothing coming up. You could say, oh, well, this should have been on pay-per-view. Maybe this should have been on pay-per-view 3 months from now. You could have done regular matches leading up to that. I know we already had Dax and Jericho, but you could have done a regular tag match involving all the guys and then eventually led to this event. But it is what it is. Now, let's go through the good, the bad, and the ugly of this particular match. The good, it started out on fire. You get Sammy and Dax in the ring. Those two guys can go. And a lot of good action, a lot of good brawling. And that was pretty much the case for the entire match up until when everybody got in the ring. It was, I enjoyed Wardlow and Hager's exchange, where Hager comes in, clears house. There's Wardlow in the other ring. He comes over. Hager draws the line, and they brawl. You had a lot of good stuff. I mean, Cash Wheeler busted open, bloody mess on the cage. A lot of good exchanges, some of which you can forget. But everything was good, I thought, up until everyone got in the ring. And then we can talk about the bad. The bad, all right, Sammy Guevara is so talented, so gifted, and he did so many great spots in this match. His balance was incredible. The top rope spots he did over and over. He hit so many in like the first 10 minutes. And then, like figure skater, he crashed and burned. Yes, I said figure skater. Growing up as a kid, my mother had me watching all those Olympics back in the day. So yeah, Sammy kind of crashed and burned like Tanya Harding, if you remember that. And yeah, I mean, that's the thing though. It's like, when you keep doing those spots over and over again, it's just hard to continue landing them. And it's just like a figure skater with their difficult triple jumps that they do. And, you know, you could chalk it up to fatigue. The match also got very sloppy towards that point where everyone was in there. There was some really bad botch spots, guys just falling on top of each other. And the match was long. I mean, we're going to talk about later how long it was and a lot of the thoughts in terms of the aftermath. Let's get into the ugly. The ugly, we see Jericho and MJF on top of the cage. They work their way up there. MJF is up first. Jericho follows. And the funny thing is, like, you looking for a split screen because they had the camera up on top of the cage for a good few minutes. At least that's what I remember. And suddenly they shoot the cage, and then the guys were still working. I was wondering, did they stop working? What's going on? So then we get the finish. The finish, as you saw, Jericho, MJF on top. MJF is threatening to throw him off. All of a sudden, Sammy leaves the cage, comes over, and surrenders. And then the following happens. MJF does his typical gloating, walks around, comes back, and then launches Jericho off cage onto, yes, an obvious crash pad. And that was tough to watch because it was so obvious, yet you hear Tony Schiavone, he fell on a steel ramp or whatever he called it. And you're like, wait a second, we've seen this before, right? Do you remember the Stadium Stampede and how that match ended? Also on a crash pad. Neither one is good. Very embarrassing, if I may say so myself. I was embarrassed for everybody involved, just having to sell that. And if you remember that Stadium Stampede, it was like, what are they doing? And that's the thing, if you don't learn from history, I hate to say it, you're doomed to repeat it, and that's what they did here. And I'm talking about with the criticism, the negative criticism, and why people could say this match failed because of the ending versus the first 20 minutes. And that's another thing, the difficulty in keeping this match going strong was it was 20 minutes and everyone got in the cage and then they did another 20 plus. I mean, we're going to talk about all that a little bit later. But, I mean, that's the thing. And then you're looking at Jericho and there he is at the bottom. And was he selling? To a degree, should he be unconscious? He just crashed on supposedly steel steps. How is he not knocked out cold and being rushed to a hospital immediately, maybe even bleeding from the back of the head? But here's Jericho awake, trying to move. That was as bad a sell job as you can get. Or give, rather. I mean, that was just awful. And now when you look at stuff going forward, in terms of the aftermath now, is like, what do you do going forward with this? I mean, while the match itself, the ending was underwhelming, Jericho has to take time off of TV to sell this, right? You would imagine. However, with Double or Nothing coming up, I'm worried that they're going to rush this to where Jericho and MJF go one-on-one. And I'm further concerned with the fact that, or the possibility that MJF could do a one-on-one job here. And this is the build that you're trying to provide for this Pinnacle faction, which I do agree that they had to win this. As bad as the finish was, Pinnacle had to go over because you can't just start a faction and then go, oh, that's it, it's over, they're done, they lost. No, so it's a good build of this Pinnacle faction. And I just feel like you can't now rush, as much as you rush this War Games Blood and Guts match, you can't now turn around and give Jericho a win in a one-on-one, a Double or Nothing. And I hope they're not planning that, I really don't. So some more of the aftermath. You learn from Uncle Dave during the week, well, later in the week, I should say, that the match was cut short. And I went, what? This match that went 40 plus minutes, including commercials, it was almost 55 minutes. And you're like, why did it need to be any longer? This was so long as it was. Like I said, it got sloppy after a while. And then you learn that it was cut short because of Kenny Omega's promo. That just was arguably one of the worst promos I've ever seen from a heavyweight champion. I mean, I'm sure I could come up with a few, but it was, like I said, one of the worst, not the worst. And it just went on and on. His talking to Orange Cassidy, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is so bad. He droned and just fumbled words left and right. Like, wow, I just awful. And that's another thing. When you talk about the length of this match, I went back and I watched the original War Games from 1987. Do you know how long that match was? 26 minutes. Once everybody got into the cage, the match was like 6 more minutes. That was it. Before they ended up getting J.J. Dillon to surrender, which you can argue is stupid that you have 8 huge guys, horsemen against Dusty, the Road Warriors, Nikita Koloff, and then you have the manager submit, which is kind of weak. I agree with that finish also. But again, back in the 80s, everything was so hot, it didn't matter who won because the crowd, go back and watch that match. It's on Daily Motion. The crowd popped over anything, like a clothesline. It was incredible how you could pop back then, and today, little reaction for anything. So yeah, people talk about, okay, well, there are too many commercials. I don't know. I mean, that's not for me to say. That's a network thing. But we wouldn't have that problem if this match were on pay-per-view as it should have been. Whether it's Double or Nothing or going forward, like I said, extend the feud. But Not everything is perfect. Now I know ratings play a part in this. They say, oh, we want to keep our numbers high. They've been over 1 million lately. They dipped last week. Let's keep it. Now again, this match was planned in advance, so last week's rating didn't matter. But yeah, they did pop over 1 million again, almost 1.1. So it was a good number. Overall, this was not a bad match. I think it was actually good up until that last 5 minutes, if you will, until it got sloppy and in the cage spot. And we'll see where they go from here. But that's just my thought on it overall. Listen, if you like this video, please let me know. Hit subscribe. Check me out, Morton's Law Podcast, on every major platform. And thank you for watching. God bless Gay Sex.